We're here at the inaugural symposium of JIIA's Global Outreach Center, gathering rapid-fire insights from our panelists. So in this very dynamic, changing environment, the JIIA has launched the Global Outreach Center to boost our international presence and voice. So amid the shifts in the global order, what kind of role do you think Japan should aim to play, both in the region and globally?
Well, I think for many years, many people felt, I'm looking more like 20 years ago, why is Japan, the third largest economic power in the world, not playing a larger role? I don't think we'd say that today. I think Japan has stepped up its leadership role, and in my address, which was focused very much on the future of trying to use the, I hate the phrase CPTPP, but the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that I've been deeply involved with all my life. The only reason it existed after President Trump withdrew from it, and the American government had signed the agreement in Auckland in December 2015, the only reason it stayed in place was because of leadership shown by Japan, and specifically your late Prime Minister Abe. So if you want a specific example of what we want Japan to do, we want Japan to do what Prime Minister Abe did. Perhaps not necessarily as dramatically every time, but use the weight and influence and soft power of Japan, not to do things that are in any way against Japan's interests, but in a far-sighted sense, provide that global leadership.
In this very dynamic, changing environment, the JIIA has launched a Global Outreach Center to boost its international presence and voice. So amid the shifts in the global order, what kind of role do you think Japan could play, both in the region and globally?
I think you are critical. And I think you are very well aware of that. And I find Japan's foreign policy, I've been here now serving for the last 3 years, particularly well positioned and really ambitious as well. You deploy it in the G7, of course. You deploy it in the remarkable relationship you have with ASEAN here in the region. You, of course, work very well in a broader Quad context with other partners. Obviously, the recent visit of the American president has really re-established the security anchor of the US and is, of course, a particularly important relationship or foreign policy relationship for Japan. But again, the work we are doing hand in hand in the UN, trying to preserve the rules-based international order. I don't think you have partners which are better aligned than Europe and Japan, and which are critical for the UN system in addition to the WTO system. All that demonstrate a keen sense of responsibility for the role you're describing for Japan. And I think the leadership of Japan, the administration, the diplomatic system is really a particularly good partner for Europe and a really impressive one as well. So well done on the global outreach. I hope that we can work closely together.
In this changing environment, the Japan Institute of International Affairs has launched the Global Outreach Center to boost its international presence and its voice. So amid these shifts in the global order, what kind of role do you think Japan should aim to play, both in the region and on the world stage?
First of all, I must congratulate the JIIA for putting together this Global Outreach Center. I think this is the need of the hour. Countries like Japan, which has a very clear strategic outlook on the world, a very clear strategic intent towards the international system, must engage like-minded powers like never before. If you don't do it now, I think the time will sort of pass on, and you won't have this kind of opportunity ever again. So my congratulations to the institution for thinking about this visionary step in some ways. So I think Japan is a very, from an Indian point of view, Japan is a very, very important and consequential power in the Indo-Pacific. And I've always argued that if you were to take the United States out of the Indo-Pacific scheme of things, the Indo-Pacific geopolitics, and it appears that today the Americans are not playing a major role in the Indo-Pacific geopolitics. If you remove the Americans from the Indo-Pacific geopolitics, which is the most consequential power in the Indo-Pacific for India, it is Japan. So from an Indian point of view, therefore, anything that Japan does in order to strengthen the FOIP concept, the free and open Indo-Pacific concept, rule of law, and to sort of ensure that there is no hegemony or unipolarity in Asia, is something that is laudable and very welcome should be welcomed by everybody, and certainly India welcomes that. Japan is an important middle power, and it certainly has a role to play in reassuring the smaller powers, the smaller powers in the region, that there are countries like Japan and India and Australia, others who can take care of some of their needs and can provide an alternative to the hegemonistic approach that China has been pursuing in the region through its debt trap diplomacy and other coercive means. So I think the timing is perfect, the intention is perfect, and the way you have sort of the messaging that is coming out of the new administration in Tokyo is also seen as very proactive and seen as, especially the controversial statement that, the so-called controversial statement that the Prime Minister made on Taiwan. It tells you about the strategic intent that exists here, and I'll go back to India with the impression and that Japan has its strategic clarity on what must be done in the absence of an American strategic presence in the region.
Amid this shift in the global order, what kind of role do you think Japan could play, both in the region and at the global stage?
Well, I think first of all, Japan has already begun to play a much more proactive role under the late Abe Shinzo. And as you know better than I, he has changed, he has discarded once and for all the so-called post-war Yoshida doctrine that left security to the US and just Japan concentrating on economics. Japan has been playing this proactive role. However, Japan needs to publicize its role more, and in that respect, I welcome this new initiative by JIIA. I think there are three basic roles you can play, Japan, in this region. First of all, as I said, America First is not to be understood as a retreat from the world. The US is still going to be a global power. As a global power, it will from time to time get distracted by things in other parts of the world, as we have seen recently over in the Middle East, the war in Gaza, right? And increasingly perhaps in the Caribbean with Venezuela and so on. But Japan is a regional power. It is the principal US ally in this region. So Japan can kind of even out. From time to time, the US its attention is going to be diverted, but Japan being a regional power, you are here all the time. Secondly, I think the US often does not understand this region because, well, for a variety of reasons, but the most fundamental is every 4 years or so, there's a whole new cast of characters and we have to go and explain things to them all the time. As the principal US ally and as the most trusted US ally, I think, in this region, Japan has a big role to explain the region to new administrations. And finally, I think, as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, many opinion polls for the last 7, 8, 9 years have consistently shown that the ASEAN countries, all 10 of them, now there's 11, there's Timor-Leste, consider Japan the most trusted of its partners. And therefore, I think you have a particular role to play in Southeast Asia beyond your traditional role of economic role. And you have already begun to play that role. But as I said, I think you need to publicize that role more to get there is a certain divide, I think, between the role you're actually playing and the perception of that role. Your role that you're playing already in not just economics, but in security, political matters is a substantive one. But it is not sufficiently recognized, particularly in Southeast Asia. And that's why this initiative by JIIA is so important.
Amid the shifts in the global order, what kind of role do you think Japan should aim to play, both in the region and globally?
I think Japan has an incredible role to play globally and in the region. First, in the region, Japan is a nation that has extraordinary contacts in Southeast Asia, relations that really began in the post-war period when Japan started to do economic outreach, development outreach. It has decades of relations of trust in places such as the Philippines that were critical to maintaining the relationship when the United States was having challenges with President Duterte. It has deep relationships in places like Indonesia, Malaysia, and beyond. It is a regional power. It is an Asian power as well, which is critical. The United States doesn't always speak in the most subtle manner when approaching the region, and we are oftentimes criticized for having a focus primarily on the strategic competition with China, and that's not the case in Japan. So Japan really has a critical role to play here in terms of economic development, infrastructure and development, cultural ties and the like. And secondly, I think with regard to Europe and the rest of the world, Japan also has an extraordinary role to play. The United States wants our allies in Japan to work closely with our allies in Europe as we move forward to face security challenges, as we move forward to face economic security challenges. So the more that our allies do together, the more that role is important. I like to think of this as global Japan. Japan really does have a unique brand. It is not the United States, it is not Europe, but it is now a defense-oriented, technological powerhouse with significant assets to invest from the enormous savings in the pension funds and the like. And Japan is a country that really stands at there's a moment of pivot here in Japan towards the future. We're seeing more technological startups, people walking away from some traditional companies. We see a massive growth in the defense sector and in the dual use sector. And I think that in quantum and AI, all these partnerships are important. And then Japan also has an important public diplomacy role to play in places like Africa, where it has been ever present, where it has been an investor as well and offers an alternative to China. So for all these reasons, I think this is an important center. It's important for Japan to understand the value of global Japan as a brand, and I think that the future is very bright for Japan if it deepens its ties with our allies and partners, deepens its ties with the United States, deepens its ties with its Indo-Pacific partners and with its partners in the developing world. And so I'm very bullish on the idea for this center, and I'm very bullish on Japan's future. The one challenge I see is, of course, the demographic challenge. This is an unthinkable challenge that really has to be dealt with squarely. I don't believe that automation can make up for the loss of 1 million citizens a year. And either Japan needs to do something about its demography or needs to do something about immigration. And it's a very hard choice. But I'm very bullish on everything else about Japan. It is a country with enormous human capital and a very forward-looking outlook.
Okay, fantastic. Well, on this hopeful note, thank you so much for your time today.